Hi, and welcome to Doing the Opposite, Business Disruptors, the podcast where you get to meet people who aren't afraid to stand up and call out bad practice or injustice. People who own their mistakes, thrive off of challenges, and who ultimately choose only to see the summit and not the mountain. I'm Jeff Dewing. I'm an entrepreneur, the author of best-selling book Doing the Opposite, and a keynote and masterclass speaker. Today, you're going to meet Ali Khan. Ali is the founder and CEO of an organisation called SHAPE, the Employee Experience Measurement Company. Now, Ali's experience spans over 2 decades, most recently developing and growing the global insurer AXA's flagship wellbeing services as CTO and Chief Science Information Officer. Ali's purpose in life is to stop well people becoming ill. When I think about Ali's purpose of preventing well people becoming ill, it reminds me of my view and my passion about root cause, that we must focus on root cause and not the symptoms. So a form of doing the opposite is, rather than curing people that are ill, why don't we focus on preventing well people becoming ill? A great mantra. And I'm looking forward to the conversation with Ali that I'm sure is going to take numerous twists and turns, but will challenge our thinking. So, hi, Ali. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
It's great to be here, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
I want you to take 2 minutes just to set the scene. Who is Ali? What is important to Ali? What problems in the world are you trying to solve, and how have you found yourself where you are today?
Oh, crikey. Okay, so the quick kind of fast version, I guess, that will keep the viewers interested as well, is I stumbled upon teaching myself how to become an engineer in wireless technology. That caught the attention of a couple of people down on the continent in France and said, can you come and give us a hand on what this really means and what your ideas are? That went on after a couple of years and became British Telecom's first home hub. After that, taught myself IoT, Internet of Things, which wasn't a thing back then. This is going back nearly 20 years ago. And that went on to power a whole bunch of new applications and starting to use Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all sorts of other things. And from there, I stumbled upon technology using that capability. And that helped me get close to medical devices. And that got me connected on the way to blood diagnostics. And that completely changed my life. At that point, I knew I found my calling, that what really people needed was help in understanding what the heck that blood metric is telling them. It's scary. Mm-hmm. People don't understand what, 4.8 millimoles per liter means. Yeah. What do you do with that information? What's that trend line look like? Because the more I looked at it, I thought, blood's scary. People don't want to do that. What are other ways of figuring that out? So I got into the world of working out, if you could ask any questions that could give you blood level of accuracy and confidence, what would those questions be? What would the topics be? And the topics kept on expanding. And eventually we got to a point where, after being the CTO in AXA's wellbeing unit in the UK, then I became their Chief Science Innovation Officer for a couple of years. And today, hopefully, we'll talk a little bit about, the skills. I've prepared a couple of points with regards to what kind of skills should we be investing in, because they come out from those questions. But more importantly, over the last couple of years, I've been really on this journey to figure out the universal truth, which is basically what all people want to do is really flourish. They want to flourish in everything that they possibly can, whether it happens to be their health, their relationships, their work, their private life. And if we can help people understand where they need to flourish and how to flourish, I think I'm a happy man.
Well, that's a great intro. Thank you. And I guess my comment on that would be, you can look at the relationship between flourish and fulfillment, right? So when you're flourishing, by default, you become fulfilled because you're getting the best out of life and When people say you only live once, I go, well, you're all wrong. You only die once, you live every day. So how do you flourish every day? And so I think that's the journey we need to go on, I guess. It's one of the things that I spoke to you about previously was the concept of skill stack. And the principle of saying, actually, the world is changing. This is now not about whether you're an accountant or a coder or a programmer or a dentist. This is about, what is your skill stack? What are all the things you can do to a greater or lesser extent? And that's shaping how people are going to run their lives, because as much as we go to work and we do something specific, when we go home, we might be an accountant, but when we go home, we rewire the house, or we refurbish the tractor, or we do some decorating, or we're an incredible gardener or an incredible cook, because we've got these skills that we don't think are relevant or come into play. But in this day and age, I think they absolutely do come into play. With that sort of as a background, I guess the bit I want to ask you now is, as you know, this podcast is about doing the opposite, being disruptive in a positive way, challenging the status quo. So during your journey, more importantly, where you are today, can you give us any examples of where you've gone against the grain? You've not done the obvious, you've done the unobvious, you've done the opposite. Try and take me through some examples of where that may have occurred in your journey.
I think there's a couple of different ways of kind of, approaching this one, Jeff. And it's that's what I love about these conversations. You get really, really deeply visceral about the person and really make it about them. And it really helps me contemplate that much more. Do you know, take that first example of, I'm a marketeer, I'm working in a bank, I'm young. And, crikey, it's 1999. And I scribble a paper. And the paper is actually just a couple of ideas. And I've got Peter Adams was his name, actually. Peter Adams was a housemate down in the middle of Old Windsor in a place called Winkfield. That's where we were sharing a house together. And he one day came and told me, he said, Ali, that paper you wrote, I was at a stand and we were presenting a couple of things. And these guys started mentioning a couple of things that caught my attention. So I actually picked up and gave them the paper. I didn't think anything of it. I left it. About 4 months later, the CEO of that firm called me and he said, oh, we've taken some of the ideas that you had. And I said, okay, I've no idea what you're talking about. He said, let's have a look at the website. And those days, this is 1999, yeah. Websites weren't that common back then, right? And he showed me, and it was word for word what I'd written. Somebody believed in a 20-odd-year-old scribbling things, who's got no experience or education and no God-given right to write things about wireless technology. And you've got a company that's a tier one player. These guys, just to give you an idea, they were the largest designer and manufacturer of decked phones in the world.
Wow.
And so he found something that he looked at inside that document and said, I believe this. So, this 20-something-year-old, I think it was 24 at the time, started going, hold on a minute, maybe there's something in this. And then I had to make a really big decision, because he actually came to me and he said, I really believe in what you're doing, and I believe in the way that you've come about, this problem statement. You don't think about it like an engineer. Can you actually try looking at this for us? And would you come and work with us full time? It took all of my energy and my might to think about, wait, I had all my life worked out. I'm going to be a corporate person. I'm going to be that guy in the suit. I'm going to be living down in the city. I'll be working, where the big glass office is. I had to leave all that behind in a heartbeat. And at the same time, when I also think of another example, when you think about blood diagnostics, I have no credentials to say that I should really be in a position where I could be telling people about how to live their lives to avoid really, really awful, diseases, especially infectious or non-communicable diseases like diabetes. Yeah, I was working with the guys, and I worked for the person that literally created the glucometer. So when they come up and they say to you, but you think differently, and you come from to the problem statement from a perspective that we don't think about, because we're marred by, actually, I think, great education, but that's limiting for them because they're working with a frame of mind that inhibits them from thinking outside of what I would say is my mind.
Constrained thinking by default. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so those ideas basically became the way in which we could start to think about diabetes reversal. Why are people behaving though? And actually, it's human behavior again. And that human behavior doesn't just damage, yourself without thinking about the cellular level of damage you're creating. Literally, you are creating cellular damage to yourself. That's what diabetes is. It's the glucose receptor not having the ability to be able to communicate effectively in order. And this is my telecoms thinking. That's how I would relate things back to myself in understanding biology through the lens of wireless engineering. And so anyway, effectively, where you end up, Jeff, is you end up in a position where you say, I don't believe I can do this, but you have to fight yourself viscerally to be able to say, yeah, I think this is worth doing it. Let's try it.
So is that a deep desire to learn stuff? Because you come from a background that you found yourself in for all the reasons you've said in wireless technology and so on. And then suddenly you're looking at blood and potentially diabetes that would not be a subject that you'd ever said 10 years earlier, oh, I'm really interested in that. Whereas what you've actually done is you stumbled across a challenge or a problem and you've gone, I think, before you know who you are. So with me, if you want to talk to me about blood, I'll say, I've got no interest in blood. Yeah, I know I've got it, but I've got no interest in it until I learn something about it. So I'm going to give you an example. My wife got diagnosed 2 years ago as type 2 diabetic. And the way in which she found out that she was type 2 diabetic, she was always very, very slim and petite through our entire relationship. And she had 3 kids. And on the third child, she put on weight and she didn't release it, whereas she did with the first 2. Anyway, about 2 years ago, despite going through the journey of 15 years of trying to go on diets and stuff, she suddenly started shedding weight that she couldn't explain. And she lost 3.5 stone in about 4 months without any form of diet or any form of conscious change in her lifestyle. And then she felt tired and various bits pieces. So she went to the doctors. Doctors done some tests, said, you're diabetic. Your blood sugars are at 38 and they should be at 6 or 5, right? You are on the verge of explosion. And and that was during COVID, where we were at home and on lockdown, and everybody else was. And one of the things we did to pass the time was we suddenly did stuff we never really did, and that was baking. We was baking cakes and stuff like that. So we was just eating shitloads of sugar, right? So anyway, the bodily damage that you talked about earlier was her muscles and her fat being eaten away by the disease of diabetics or diabetes. But then coming back to what you say, she's also one of these people that is very worried person, worries about stuff all of the time. So she'd done the worst thing she could have done, and that was Googled it, right? And then she's joined a number of diabetes groups. And of course, there's all these scaremongery about, your feet, your arms, your legs, the air you breathe, and, whether the curtains are drawn or not, and God knows what else. Anyway, so she gets fed by that because, as I also use in my sayings, that 96% of what's in your head is not real, only 4% is real, and you end up sort of escalating it. But anyway, so she went on this very strict diet. She followed the routine. She had, a prick test that she had to do to check her blood and so on and so on. And within 9 months, despite the fact she would always say, I can't have that, I'm a diabetic, she's now pre-diabetic. So her blood has been stable for the last year at 4, 5, 6, and so on. Apart from the odd spike because she's gone and had a bite of a cake. Anyway, but this is the bit that's interesting about technology. So I want to tell you that story because it's something I've lived and I've experienced and I understand it. And I also believe a lot of it is controlled by your mind, your mindset, your well-being and so on. But there's something that's really interesting. One of the things when you do a prick test, it tells you what your blood level is, right? And it's a real simple thing to do. But then they've got new gadgets come out where you can put a sensor in the arm and you have an app. And you put the app on your arm and it tells you your blood reading. Much more convenient. You haven't got to put needles in your finger. And then suddenly we go through a phase for 3 months with her alarm going off 3 times a night. And it's driving me mad. And she's getting up saying, Jeff, I'm down to 2. I'm down to 2. I'll have to have a sweet or something. So she has a sweet and off we go. And then one night I'm going, I just don't believe this. So one night it went down to 2 or 2.2. She's woke me up because she's in panic or whatever else. I said, right, stop what you're doing. Get your prick test out. We're going to test it by your prick test. We tested it by the prick test and the prick test said 5.5. it wasn't 2. So now there's a challenge that says, why is the advanced electronics telling us it's 2.2 when the accurate methodology of a prick test is saying it's 5.5? We then went on to do that another 20 times. And each time, the prick test proved it was safe, but yet the alarm said it wasn't. And then you've got the challenge of people's thought process, because she will still panic when the electronic says 2.2, even though she's proved to herself that typically it's not 2.2, it's 5.5. And this is the impact on people, right?
It's a fascinating kind of, crikey, Jeff, I'm really sorry, first of all, that you've been through all of that. That's not really uncommon, unfortunately. When one of the nice things that kind of you do when you learn about the biology of what happens with diabetes, you actually, first of all, realize that the medical profession is looking at the majority, but everybody's busy. And in fact, you know what? In corporates, this is exactly what we do from a flourishing the corporate kind of productivity perspective. We look at the midpoint. We always look at the bell curve, right? It's those mid people. There's people at the edges we tend not to worry about. Now, those people at the edge point, by the way, they happen to be, for example, in a very good healthy weight range. So what's one of the first things that we look for in the medical profession is they say, look for a person who's obese, look for a person who's not, got a great diet and so forth. But actually what we found, and this was actually one of our studies that we performed, was we were starting to go, hold on, you could be a person who's underweight, but still be a diabetic. Why is that happening? And what we found was that it was pointing towards actually another marker that you could look at, something like what we call hepatic fat. So if you're literally, your liver is your guiding point towards a certain profile of people, towards whether they will have a predisposition towards diabetes. Now, what you can also do is you can actually start to look at other markers, and this is the art of what my world is all about now. What is the single most question that has got such a high grade of accuracy, because we look at the statistical analyses that tells us if you were ever going to only ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions about a certain topic, that would be it, and that would guide us back. Now, coming back to the diabetes story, there are so many people out there who are in this condition. Diabetes doesn't just creep up and you knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm here." Yeah. It actually happens under the hood for the best part of up to 10 years from the studies. So people are carrying this issue with them, but they don't know it. And that's exactly what's going on inside businesses everywhere around the world. They've got people who don't even know what the issue is yet. So therefore they're trying to deal with the wrong thing, and which makes it even worse.
And it's interesting because I think we spoke before and you know this, but I obviously live in Portugal, and Portugal have got an incredible health service. It's quite fascinating. But what they do differently here is where you might have a doctor that will refer you to a specialist who will then carry out ultrasound, blood tests, whatever. Typically what tends to happen is they'll then write back to the doctor, give them the information, the doctor calls you and then explains to you, right? In Portugal, you get referred and you go and see the specialist. The specialist gives you all the results. So now you're looking at data that you've got no idea what it says, right? You've got no idea what it means. And you're looking at it and you're deciding to say, well, I'm scared about that, but I don't know why I'm scared. And I'm scared about that, but I don't know why I'm scared. And before you know where you are, you're making these judgments. Now, coming back to something I believe in the technology that we obviously build and use, is about how do you simplify the complex? How do you engage people in the right way with one version of the truth, and not the ability to scaremonger or create fear or anxiety? And if you look at the iWatch now, where you've got a situation where it's telling you your to an element your cardio activity, it's telling you your oxygen level in your blood, and various other bits and pieces. But what it's doing is it's basically making it really simple. It says really should be between 8 and 10, and you're 9.8, so you're fine, right? It's giving you an indication. It's like when it monitors your heart rate and says your sleeping heart rate should be between 65 and 75. And if your heart rate goes to 120 while you're sleeping, guess what we're going to do? We're going to wake you up and tell you, because it's something you should be aware about. And what you're doing is you're simplifying stuff that enables people to manage their own health, right? To the extent they can, without the need for 5 years of doctorate and God knows what. And I think when we go on that journey, if you imagine with blood sugar, there'll be people in my organisation for years that have said to me, on a long board meeting. I've gone 7 hours, and they'll stop me and say, "Jeff, I need a Mars bar. I need some sugar. I've got no energy." Now, they didn't know that their blood was up or down. What they did know is they needed energy, and that comes from sugar. So, therefore, in an unprofessional or unknowledgeable environment, they actually understood their body and they reacted to it. But wouldn't it be interesting if you've got like the 5 key things that we should all be worried about in managing our own health was simplified and made easy so that we can then make our own judgments, and the impact that would have on any health service could only be positive, surely.
Yeah, crikey, I'm going to tell you something I think that I've discovered by doing a little bit of quick analysis of my own. And it's a little bit scary because Apple's in a very, very good position. Now, I've got to be careful about what I say openly, right? But I'm speaking to you, Jeff, and you
don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just say what you feel. That's what matters.
So, you know, I mean, this is the background. This is what we do. We ask we hunt for the perfect question. In the context of looking at, for example, mental health, most organizations will say, yeah, we're going to look at our employees and we're going to test, and we use the generalized anxiety disorder, or the PHQ, you know, whichever variant 4 or 7 happens to be that they want to use. And what they end up with is actually using a tool that has been trained originally on a clinical population, i.e. ill people that have been referred by the doctor. So it's usually secondary level care. Now, in this industry, in medical care, where you start from makes a big, big difference to where you end up.
Yeah.
Right? And so, for example, we use something called DAS in our product, you know, for the depression, anxiety, stress scale. So now we can tell somebody whether they're depressed, anxious, or stressed. But it's been trained on general population. And the variance is small. But when you look at that variance of a couple of percent over a population of a couple of 100 million, using an iPhone to test themselves with the GAD and the PHQ, you've got a shitload of problems coming your way.
Yeah.
And so I won't publish the numbers over here too openly, but if that scales the way it's supposed to, and, you know, in all honesty, you know, there is a level of duty of care that is important, that, you know, it's like we were talking earlier about podcasters, right? Anybody who's got a microphone, laptop on Riverside now can start a podcast. It doesn't make you a podcaster, right? And so coming back to people, in your sense, that yes, you know, and by the way, Google's great for so many things, right? It's great at being a doctor, and now it's going to get even better because now people are just going to code it into, you know, these GPT instances that, you know, have just been announced. They're going to be able to turn a GPT into a doctor or whatever, you know, they want, a lawyer or whatever it wants to be. But I think you're right. What people have first got to listen to is their body. But education, and being, you know, taking control of your health starts from actually understanding it first. And you've got to educate people into that. And the 5 or 6 areas from a health perspective that really must get right. It's their sleep. It's what they eat. It's what they drink. It's their stress levels, you know, the relationships behind it and so forth. It's the exercise and activity. If you can physically get on top of those things and mentally get on top of them, you're going to actually live a relatively healthy life.
Well, I believe everything you're saying because I'm a believer in that principle. And what I also believe is that we're all arrogant sometimes, ignorant sometimes, lazy sometimes. And I'm going to give you an example. When I was young, I was extremely fit, and I studied karate from when I was 6 years old until I was 20 years old. And I was as fit as you could ever possibly be. I've done no material exercise outside of walking for 40 years, right? I've joined the gym 5 times, spent a fortune, never been, right? With every best intention, because one day I say I'm going to do it, but then I don't do it. And there's a myriad of reasons why you don't. And the question is, you've got to work out why it is you don't. Anyway, so to cut a long story short, I had a situation of coming back from Italy 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago now. And the plane landed, and as it landed, I had the phone between my legs, and the phone fell out, and it fell onto the floor right in front of me. And the plane came to a stop. I bent down to pick it up and realised I can't reach and pick up my phone. How ridiculous is that? there's a problem here. And he flicked a switch and said, you've got to take control of your life. So we got back home 4 days later, because he was in the UK, we then flew back to Portugal. And I booked something I'd never done before, a personal trainer. So I've now got a personal trainer come to see me twice a week. And the reason I did that was because I needed accountability. So if I said I'm going to join a gym, I know that I'd find the first reason to not go because I'm busy. When the personal trainer turns up, I've got to do it, right? So I've now had 3 weeks of personal training, which has been challenging, hard, but massively rewarding to the fact that I look forward to it. I had to create an environment that would hold me accountable, right? Now, so that's one part of it. The second part of it is, if you go back, I did a podcast when we first started this with Sir Clive Woodford, right? The rugby coach that won the World Cup with England in 2003. And the reason I interviewed him was because he'd done the opposite. He'd done things that never had been done in coaching before, in rugby before, which resulted in winning the World Cup. So, of course, we're all curious. And all he did was he created an environment where he made every player responsible for their own progress. He didn't say, you are going to be relying upon me being a good or a bad coach, right? He made them accountable. The way he did it is he did it with technology, and that's where the vests come from, that monitor the amount you're running, the amount you're breathing, the cardio, all that sort of stuff. And he made them own their own results. So they can now decide what they're going to do to improve on that in one way, shape or another. And that was how they won the World Cup. And of course, now you can see across the entire amount of sport, the statistics that players have got on their own performance gives them clarity on what they need to do to improve or whatever. But they own it. They're accountable for their own outcomes. If you now switch that into health, right, as we've been talking about today, where you can create some really simplistic, laymanized viewpoints for the human being to take ownership of their own health. When people own their own health, the positive impact on the health system is going to be phenomenal. But not only that, because people care about their own health, but they don't care about what they don't know. So that's the generational change I think is coming with technology, but not just technology. Technology is an enabler. It's creating an environment where people say, now I have influence over my health, whereas before I just had to wait until the doctor told me what's wrong.
You know, whilst you're speaking, there's a couple of thoughts that come to my mind. I remember years ago, we were doing a study. We asked loads of people, about who owns your health. And the number of people that said my doctor was just incredible. and it's interesting when you ask different countries the same question, you get different answers. Out in the West, you find it's ownership, whereas out in the East, it tends to be, I'll go to my doctor. And I was speaking to the head of the hepatitis C, massive piece of work doing that in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And they were telling me, they said, you don't feel like you've been serviced by a doctor until you've had an injection, which only increases the risk of hepatitis C, for example, in the first place. So it's worse that you do. But you know what's really interesting here is the emotional impact that you've had from an event that turned the corner in your mind to moving from, I didn't know about this, or I'm perfectly fine. And this, in the science, we call it's called the trans-theoretical model. Get my wording right? It's the trans-theoretical model of change by a brilliant guy called Prochaska. And what Prochaska did was he said, people are pre-contemplative. I'm not even thinking of smoking. You can say all you like, I'm not going to quit smoking, don't care. And that's a lot of people who smoke, right? And then you've got people who are contemplative. Preparation, so they want to prepare. Action, maintenance. 5 steps. Pre-contemplative, contemplative, preparation, action, maintenance. And in behavior change systems, what tends to happen, especially around health, everybody's trying to get everybody to action. Go take action. But if that person doesn't even care, they don't even have the desire, it won't happen. So the job is to move them to the next stage in order to get them. Now, clearly what happened to you, something was already playing in the back of your mind saying, you know what, this is now the trigger point to leapfrog to, I've got to do something about it. So you went straight in that moment to preparation, and then you went into action quick. And it reminds me of, so I'm out in California a couple of years ago. I'm speaking to my mentor, my old CEO there. We're having dinner out downtown in Santa Clara, And I looked at him, and he's honestly, he looked like he was, 4 months permanently pregnant. So I looked at him, and I won't say his name, but, we had this deeply motivational, emotional conversation where I said to him, I'm doing this research, and what we found is that, height and weight is surpassed by looking at basically your waist and your hip size. If you look at those size ratios, you can actually get a much better understanding of what's really going on inside the body of a person. And for males, it looks like this. Anyway, he looks at me and he says, Ali, don't tell me. I know you can measure mortality in 8 questions now. That's brilliant. But I'm going to die, but I'll die fat and happy. And I retorted to him, I said, that's not true from the statistics. The statistics tell me by the time you hit 65 and you carry on doing what you're doing, you'll die fat and happy, but you'll be in a wheelchair.
Right.
And the percentage looks like this. I didn't know that statement was going to change his life.
Yeah.
You know what he did? He did exactly the same thing. He went away, he thought about it, and he started taking walks. And it built for him, and he built. So it's that contemplation. So in psychology, we call it consciousness raising. You had a consciousness raising moment on the aeroplane that said, I've got to do something about it. And that's the job. That's for flourishing. The same thing that we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to understand that they're in control and they can do something about it.
You're actually right when you say about smokers or people that drink or people that have got, a 4-month pregnant belly, of which I'm guilty. And there was a lady I met a few months ago who'd done some great work for us in psychology with me and some of my colleagues. And she was brilliant. And she was a hypnotist. But she was a hypnotist not to solve problems, hypnotist to help you go back and deal with previous traumas that you didn't even know was a trauma. And we spoke to her afterwards, and she was absolutely fantastic, game-changing. And we spoke to her afterwards and said, do you get people coming to you about smoking? She said, oh, yeah. So what, you help them stop smoking? Oh, yeah. What's your success rate? 100%. Okay, why is that then? She goes, because I won't treat people that don't want to give up smoking, right? So she said, before I do anything, they have to convince me that they want to do it. It's not because their husband or their wife's told them to do it. It's not because, this environment says I must do it. Because if you don't want to stop, no hypnotizing will stop you, right? So you've got to go on this journey of wanting to stop. And the same thing applies with whether it be fitness, whether it be the way you eat the food. And again, you can imagine that we've all gone through life in different ways. But yeah, I never forget going to, I don't know if people will know this on this show, but I remember going to beef-eater restaurants. The reason you went to beef-eater restaurant was you'd order a steak. The steak would come out on this oval plate, massive. And then on separate plates would come out chips, onion rings, and it'll be like, oh, value. And of course, you would eat the lot because you're paying for it, right? And it's good value. It's 12 quid or something. And you go, oh, this is great value. And then you'd have a drink or a beer or whatever, and you'd leave the restaurant and realise you couldn't walk because you'd eaten so much food, right? And we go, yeah, but that's great. And then as you get older and you go through sort of the journey, where you think because a big meal had this value, we now suddenly change our view. I said, no, now it's about being comfortable after you've eaten a meal. It's about eating until you're 80% full and all this sort of stuff. And I've gone from a person that used to have big meals, and in the last 10 years, I have the equivalent of 3 fistfuls of the meal every day, because now I only need small portions to be comfortable. And of course, I'm always comfortable. But why is it taking us so long to learn this stuff? And it is education, right? Invariably is education.
It's interesting that, we tend to use a lot of self-centric language about me and how do I do this? But really, we need help from other people. And one of the interesting things that I've been researching a lot recently in the context of behavior change is how much do you do things for your self-centric goals versus how much do you do it for those around you? And we're actually busy doing a lot of research around this because we found that the literature's really, really good on this. Actually, it's very weak at the moment in terms of size-wise of lots of evidence base. But there's plenty of good, strong evidence in the examples we've seen that I might not do it for me, but I'll definitely do it for my wife. I might not do it for me, but I'll definitely do it for my colleagues because they deserve better than that. And so, yeah, all of these all of these goals, I think we're intertwined, we're interconnected with each other. And if we find and face those interconnections in a positive way, we're more than likely to actually, act upon it in a positive way as well.
I guess you would bring a bit of humour to this. I can imagine, because like I said to you before, or just a few minutes ago, that since being very fit when I was young, I started working behind the desk and spent 40 years behind the desk, and of course I've got the typical middle age fat across your belly, right? So I then, and my wife said to me, Jeff, you're really going to adjust your belly. I go, yeah. And she's doing it for health reasons and whatever else. So, but then I've got this dilemma. So I then go and do some massive regime for the next 2 years on exercise, and I get the most incredible six-pack, right? And I look as fit as anything, wearing clothes, muscly, whatever. Then I've got another set of challenges. My wife's saying, there's women looking at you over there. I'm not letting you, you're not going out on your own, aren't you, mates? And so as much as it all said, so that's the humour side. But the funny thing is that when you go on those journeys, and okay, that's a humorous example, but suddenly you've got other challenges you have to face as a result of the action you've taken that you don't always think about.
Yeah, if you turn out to be a hot dude, right? And you live down as well, you'll have to take the chair down there, sitting over there. You'll have to off, right?
Yeah, on my surfboard. Yeah. Good.
There you go.
Anyway, Ali, listen, I've loved the conversation. We're coming to the end now. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. If you was only allowed to say one thing, it had to be the one thing you would say, what would you say you were most grateful for?
Family. Building a startup is not easy. And I think I put my family not actively, not looking for it, but, they have to wait.
Yeah.
They have to take second place a lot.
Well. And
so, you read about divorces and all these kind of things. I feel nothing like that. For me, I'm a bit too smart for that. I don't know where the priorities lie. The stress and the pain that it causes. And, the other thing, Jeff, without kind of pondering too deep on this, like you said, is the amount of people that I've come across in the startup industry that have to project a really, really pro-positive image. Yet behind the scenes, they're torn and they're broken apart. And it's only when one founder speaks to another, they start to understand. And I'm so grateful. And the reason is because of my family.
Right, the second question. If there was only one message you could give to this audience, what would that one message be?
Make other people happy.
Oh, boom. Well, listen, Ali, it's been absolutely fantastic. Love the discussion, love the depth, love the journey. And as always, the half dozen conversations we've had, it's always been energizing when I get up off my chair and have a little skip and jump around the room and go downstairs. And so I really appreciate your time and effort. I really enjoyed it. And of course, it's touched on in areas that we don't discuss enough. And I think it's been great that we've surfaced it. And so I thank you very much. And I can't wait for us to catch up again soon.
Thanks ever so much. And thanks for having me as well. Cheers.
Well, another great conversation. A big thanks to Ali for spending time with me today and taking us down a road that we're not used to. It's the first time we've really talked about health and biology and the body and so on. So what was interesting is his desire to understand a problem that may not be in his skill set initially, but then looking at it from a totally different perspective, a different lens. I guess the bit I loved most about that conversation, and I enjoyed it all, was how it unfolded just through debate, just through chewing the fat, how we suddenly made that connection with sport and how sport has become so much more elite in terms of fitness, in terms of nutrition, in terms of sleep, in terms of controlling, reducing or stopping alcoholism within the elite environment. Because all we did to get us from where we were 20 years ago to where we are today was the one action we took, or the sporting world took. They gave the athletes control over their destiny. They gave athletes the knowledge to manage themselves. And when you control your destiny, you become your best self. Powerful stuff. The power of a conversation. Anyway, all details, any references regarding Ali and what he's doing will be in the show notes for you to look up if you so wish. But of course, there are also loads more episodes for you to enjoy on this podcast, Doing the Opposite, Business Disruptors. So do listen back to some of my earlier conversations. There's some real gems in there. But one of my most touching episodes from season 1, when we first launched, was my incredible conversation with my good friend Linda Green, who shared some incredible stories and the traumas that she experienced. And I'd known her for 10 years and never knew none of this. And it was an absolutely incredible roller coaster ride. It was a real eye-opener. Also, my podcast website, where you can see all of the seasons, has been refreshed. So I'd love to get your feedback when you get the chance to take a look. You can listen also to all the episodes for free on any of your podcast platforms. Just head over to jeffdewing.co.uk and click on the podcast button. And of course, you can now also watch all of these episodes too in video format. You'll find the link to my YouTube channel in the show notes. So a big thanks finally to Nicola Crawshaw at Crowd FM, my PR team at Thinking Hat, and to my production team, Sam Walker and Michael Blades at What Goes On Media. Thanks for listening.